The NBA season tips off in under 3 weeks, and some players' decisions about COVID-19 vaccinations are sparking controversy. ESPN is reporting 95% of the league is inoculated, but some star athletes are speaking out about why they haven't gotten the shot.
I am not sitting up here saying vaccines are bad. I'm not sitting up here saying that this vaccine is bad. I'm not sitting up here saying that you shouldn't get it. It is a personal decision between every individual. That's it. We have some of the best team docs and doctors in the world here in D.C. that constantly educate me and that continue to give me the answers of questions that I constantly have. And so I'm going to continue to ask those questions. And when I feel confident and ready with the results and the answers I get, I'll handle them accordingly.
And there are some players that say they will not publicly share their vaccination status.
Honestly, I like to keep that stuff private, man. I'm a human being first, and obviously living in this public sphere, there's just a lot of questions about what's going on in the world of Kyrie, and I think I just would love to just keep that private and handle it the right way with my team.
All right, so for more on this, we want to bring in CBS Sports NBA reporter Jasmyn Wimbish. Thank you so much for joining us, Jasmyn. What rules do unvaccinated players have to follow this upcoming season?
Yeah, so thanks for having me, you guys. So some of the rules that apply to unvaccinated players are a lot of the same guidelines that the NBA put in place last season, which is regular COVID testing, mandatory quarantine for those who come in contact with someone who's tested positive for COVID. They will also be required to socially distance from players on their team who are vaccinated. So that means that in the locker room, their locker space will be a little bit distanced from those who are vaccinated. During team meetings, they will also have to be within 6 feet apart from their vaccinated players, as well as when they're eating. They won't be able to be in the same team or in the same room as teammates who are vaccinated. They will also be prohibited from doing pretty much anything outside of playing basketball on the road or at home. So that means not going to bars, clubs, those types of things that NBA players enjoy doing.
So, Jasmyn, as you know, New York City and San Francisco have placed restrictions on unvaccinated players. What are they, and what are the consequences for players who are unvaccinated?
So the 3 teams that affects this season are the New York Knicks, Brooklyn Nets, and the Golden State Warriors in San Francisco. And basically what those vaccine mandates say is any player has to be vaccinated to play in those home games. So for the Knicks, they actually don't have to deal with that issue because they said on media day that they're at 100% vaccination rate. But for the Nets and the Golden State Warriors, they have at least one player on their team who has not been vaccinated. So what that looks like is Kyrie Irving on the Brooklyn Nets, who has not shared his vaccination status, he won't be able to play in home games if he decides not to get vaccinated. Same with Andrew Wiggins in San Francisco. They also cannot step foot inside of any team facilities, meaning they won't be able to practice the season if they decide not to get vaccinated. And they also won't be paid for those games that they will be required to sit out. So for someone like Kyrie Irving, he's standing to lose around $300,000 per game if he decides to sit out due to not being vaccinated.
So Jasmyn, I had an opportunity to speak to NBA legend Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He is speaking out on this issue, and he believes that players should be removed from the team if they are unvaccinated. So I asked him why he felt so strongly about that. Take a listen.
Well, I think that when we ignore a pandemic that is killing people just because some people don't feel like doing some research, I can't go along with that. This COVID thing is killing black people and brown people at a ridiculous rate. So, it's really an extension of Black Lives Matter. And we have to make this obvious and let people know how important it is.
So Kareem Abdul-Jabbar has been outspoken on a number of issues going back to his college days. I mean, he is not just a legendary ball player, but also one of those towering figures just in sort of the zeitgeist of America, like Muhammad Ali, and what he says carries weight. I thought it was really striking, Jasmyn, that he said, for people who are out there protesting police brutality and who are saying that Black Lives Matter, to reject the science here is tantamount to rejecting Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, and I agree with what Kareem said, and it's really unfortunate that some of these even vaccinated players in the league, a lot of what you'll hear from them going back to media day on Monday is, they're all saying that it's a personal choice. And LeBron James said that he is vaccinated, but he will not try and convince others to get vaccinated, and said that this isn't something similar to Black Lives Matter or anything like that, that it's a personal decision for each and every individual, similar to what Bradley Beal said. He said the exact same thing. And when you take it as a personal decision, it really undermines the magnitude of this pandemic, and it is a public health issue. So for these players to say that this is a personal issue, it's really unfortunate to hear.
Mm.
Can I just point out that the WNBA announced that their players were fully vaccinated, 99% of them in June. The ladies leading again when it comes to this sort of thing. But I'm wondering, you sort of outlined the consequences for not getting vaccinated for players. Has the NBA said anything more about that? Reacted? Issued a statement or anything along those lines?
I think the NBA is in a really tough spot here because they, of course, would like to have a vaccine mandate for the players, but the players union has turned that down several times, and it's just been a non-starter for them. So I think that their best tactic right now has been to impose those guidelines that I said about, daily testing. And, I think as we get closer to the season, as we've already seen just over the span of 4 days, the percentage has jumped up 5%. So now we've got around 30 players left who are unvaccinated. So I think as we get closer to the season, there will be a bigger push to, get those players vaccinated because no one wants to go through regular COVID testing or mandatory quarantine or things like that. So I think that's kind of how the NBA is operating from their position.
And Jasmyn and Emery, part of my conversation with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was really fascinating. He has a new Substack out, and in the Substack, he says that people who are unvaccinated or who are pushing, misinformation about the vaccine, or who are even refusing to get vaccinated, he says that they have blood on their hands. And, one of the things that we talked about is this notion that a lot of these players are rejecting the science now, but if their children were to come down with something, if their children were sick, they'd rush to the hospital, and whatever the doctors and nurses said they needed to do to save that child's life, they would most likely be all for it. And this notion that you are a ball player, you're a basketball player, or anybody who's not a doctor, who's not an epidemiologist or a scientist, says that they're doing research before they make a decision. He struggled to reconcile what kind of research somebody who's not a scientist would be able to do before making those decisions. And he did hit back at even players like you said, Jasmyn, LeBron, who is vaccinated but refuses to encourage others to be vaccinated. We talked about Roy Campanella, the Brooklyn Dodgers great, who promoted the polio vaccine in the 1950s. And so I wonder if the NBA is thinking about that, even perhaps doing a PSA themselves to encourage people and players to be vaccinated.
Yeah, PSA is definitely something that the NBA has talked about, and they've tried to recruit some of the biggest names of their league, like LeBron James. Giannis Antetokounmpo, the Milwaukee Bucks, is another player that they've tried to recruit. I'm not sure as far as Giannis goes, but I know that LeBron has said, he said on media day, he won't try and convince others to get the vaccine. So that's going to be a difficult thing for the NBA to do if some of its biggest stars aren't willing to get in front of the camera and say, tout the safety of the vaccine.
And Jasmyn, real quick before we go, has anybody in the NBA, any players, said anything about what Kareem Abdul-Jabbar has been talking about? He just didn't talk to me. He's been talking to a lot of reporters.
I have not heard anything from the players. They've not reacted to that. They've kind of been, moving on to the next subject and not really wanting to talk about the vaccine and, liking to keep things private, and it's a personal matter. So there's not really been a big reaction from him.
Interesting. Jasmyn, great to have you on. Come back and see us again.
Thank you.